Hello, everybody. This is Jack Dennis, and welcome to JD's Wide World of Fly Fishing and Tying. As you know, I like to present a lot of historic and older films about fly fishing. I've been in the business for a long, long time. I've got one from a friend of mine from Canada that he did when he was very young. I discovered this VHS gem while converting my old VHS collection to digital, probably filmed in the late 80s or early 90s. Gives a great view of the excellent fishing opportunities in southern Alberta. Even today, I've known Jim for, almost 50 years. I met him when legendary sportscaster and close friend Curt Gowdy, we went fishing together on the Bow River, and Jim was our guide. He introduced me to the outstanding fishing in southern Alberta. Eventually, I would start lecturing, doing sport shows and fly fishing clubs in Canada for over 30 years. And we would run into each other, and I got to know him very well and did a lot of lectures with him. Eventually, though, I would bring fishermen to the Bow River, and Jim would coordinate the trips along with his old friend, Master Guide and Tyer Rick Harding. Over the years, I became ingrained in Canadian fly fishing, watching Jim become Canadians, or the Canadas, I guess, a premier writer and personality. He and his wife, who is, by the way, an accomplished artist, they also have a musical career in bluegrass and have performed with some of the biggest names in music. Jim and Lynda began fly fishing together in the 70s. I even arranged a trip to New Zealand for them. They operate what I think is really a wonderful school, McLennan's Fly Fishing School, based around Calgary, and they've taught thousands of people the fine art of fly fishing. He's also an author of 5 books, and really terrific books, bestsellers even here in the U.S. He's been a contributed editor for many years for Fly Fisherman and Fly Fusion magazines. He just brought out a new book called Trout Tracks, and Jim was co-host along with Derek Bird of Fly Fusion's television. So he's been around the camera. But let's go back to one of his first endeavors. As a young man, he's going to tell us about Canadian southern fly fishing, especially the Bow River, which is one of the great rivers in the world for fly fishing. Take it away.
The western boundary of southern Alberta, and countless streams leave the Rockies and flow through western foothills on their way to the Great Plains. On this tape, you'll see 3 trout streams and samples of the kinds of fly fishing they offer. While these streams are among my favorites, they represent just a tiny portion of the fly fishing available in the area. Alberta's trout streams are somewhat spread out and frequently temperamental. Local advice is essential on these waters, and a guide will be a great benefit to a first-time angler, particularly on the Bow River. There's no place in the world I'd rather be than where I am right now. I've spent more pleasurable hours of my life here in the Bow than any place else I've ever been. And I look forward to every chance I get to come down here, especially in the evenings like this when I might get a chance to fish dry flies to these big Bow River trout. Hi, I'm Jim McLennan. As you may have guessed, we're on the Bow River downstream of the city of Calgary in southern Alberta. And we're going to spend some time fishing the Bow, hopefully catching some more fish like that on dry flies. We'll also show you some other techniques that you can use to fish these big Bow River browns and rainbows. We're also going to spend some time on two other Alberta streams that you may or may not have heard about. We're going to go down and visit the Crow's Nest River in the southwest corner of the province, where we're really going to work hard and do some nymphing and hopefully try and catch some big Crow's Nest rainbows. And then we're going to spend some time on a little spring creek about 2 hours north of Calgary called the North Raven River, where the fish are not as big, but they're very tough because it's a really clear, slow little stream. So I hope we can find some more fish and have some fun. You're overlooking the Horseshoe Bend, a very pretty section of the lower Crow's Nest River in the southwestern part of Alberta. Crow's Nest is probably our second most popular stream and is full of fat, angry rainbow trout. The stream has often been compared to the Madison River in Montana because it has similar water types and it also shares some common insects. The two most important insects in this river are the two large species of stoneflies, the Acronuria and the Pteronarcis species. We're going to go down and take a look at the Crow's Nest, try and do some fishing, and we'll probably do some nymph fishing because the river is especially suited to that. This is the stream I have the biggest crush on at the present time. I just love this river and I really get excited when I come down to fish it. I don't live close enough to it that I can fish it 2 or 3 times a week, so it's a real kind of a big deal every time I come and fish this river. So let's go down and see what we can find. There's a lot of things to like about this river. One is the setting. It's coming out of the Rockies and flowing through beautiful foothill country, and it's just a wonderful place to be no matter what you're doing. I also really like the size of this river. It's a little higher now than normal, but under normal conditions it's just a comfortable size. It's small enough that you can cross it and move around in it easily, and it's possible to fish with several different methods, and yet it's enough water that it can really produce big fish. Nymph fishing is really getting popular these days, and there's a lot of different ways you can do it. Probably the most popular method is with a big indicator and long casts, and just throw it up and work it all the way down through the pool. I prefer to do it a little differently. I'd rather fish my way along with very short casts, and I'm sort of working the fly through the run half by feel and half by sight. This doesn't necessarily catch more fish. I just seem to get more entertainment value from it this way. So I like to work my way along, moving up, and just trying to get the fly into the right places as often as I can. The last question you have to ask yourself, of course, is where do I cast the fly? And in a pool like this, I think the right spot is down the seam where the fast water in the center of the run moves by the slow water along the edges. The fish should be lying in the slow water, but right up against the fast stuff. So all they have to do is reach out and grab your fly as it goes by. So it's important to try and get your fly to run right down that seam, right down the right track to the fish. Under normal conditions, this pool here might be a place where you could expect fish to come up to an attractor dry fly or maybe a grasshopper pattern, or it might be a place where you'd find fish working a hatch. But with the water high as it is in early season, I think we're probably going to have to go down and get these fish with some of the stonefly nymphs that I've already told you about in this river. There's a fish. Oh. Maybe I ought to sharpen the old hook here. That one felt like a trout. checked the hook a minute ago, but I just missed 2 fish. So I'll touch it up. A hook hone is one of the things that people most often neglect to use and carry. And I think it's very important to have your hook sharp, because not very many of them are sharp enough as they come out of the box. See if we can't hook one and hang on to it. There's one. I think it's a whitefish. Probably land him. Took the little stonefly nymph. I'd rather catch trout than whitefish, but I'd rather catch whitefish than nothing. There's a fish. That's a rainbow. Jump again. Do it again. Good work. You can just, the difference between the trout and the whitefish is amazing. As soon as you hit them, the trout just gets so mad. And you just can't horse them in like you can the whitefish. But it's nice to find one where they belong and get them to do what they're supposed to do. I've got a little insect net that I carry in the back of my vest, and I use this to sample the insect life that's in the stream I'm fishing. And I've done it a lot of times in this river, so I think I got a pretty good idea what's here. But it's a very good idea to do this before you start fishing in a new stream, because if you don't have any idea what kind of insects are there, you're going to have a hard time choosing the right fly. So I'm just going to put this down in the water and turn over some rocks with my feet and see what we can catch. In this sort of medium-sized gravel, I'd expect to find a lot of mayfly nymphs and maybe some caddis. Could be some green drake mayflies in here. Oh, there's lots of stuff. Let's go over to the bank here and take a look and see what we got. This is some of the insects that we got in our sampling of the gravelly run behind us. And there's some fairly important insects here. This right here is our western green drake. This is a big mayfly, both as a nymph and as an adult. You can see these are getting ready to hatch. That wing case is very swollen, and probably sometime within the next week there will be adult green drakes around. Here's a fly that you can use to imitate it, just a peacock curl thorax and a dubbed abdomen. This is the insect that this river is most famous for. It's the nymph of the giant stonefly that we call a salmon fly. These live under the rocks in areas of the current or areas of the river where the bottom is primarily large rocks and boulders, where the current is fast. They live either 3 or 4 years in the nymph stage, and when they're mature, they migrate to the banks of the river by crawling to the edges, and they get out on the rocks and on the vegetation, and their wing cases will split here, and out will step the adult salmon fly. And you can get some pretty good dry fly fishing after that's happened, when there's some adults around and when they come back to lay their eggs. But if you can be on the river when these nymphs are migrating by the thousands from the middle of the river or from under the rocks in the river to the edges, you're going to have some really good fishing, because a lot of them get knocked off the rocks, and they're poor swimmers. When they get knocked loose from the rocks, they just drift with the current. And the fish will see a lot of those during that migration, and will be looking for them, and you can get a lot of good fishing then. This is the other important stonefly in the crow's nest, the golden stonefly. These guys are active, as you can see here. They usually hatch a week or so after the salmon flies do. And they live in the same kind of water. And they also have a multi-year life cycle. This fly is probably 2 years from hatching. He's a little smaller than these imitations we've got here. But there are lots of nymphs in the river this size and another notch larger. some different theories in imitation that you can see here. This one in the end is a Charles Brooks Yellowstone, and it is a very general impressionistic representation of the fly. It's the overall the right color, the right shape, and this is not the same size as that, but you can tie it in the sizes that are appropriate. Has legs and a hackle wrapped all around the thorax, representing legs. This one on the end is a more accurate duplication of the fly. Has 2 wing cases, 3 pairs of legs, and the segmentation, the mottled back, and the light-colored underside. Looks more like the stonefly to us. And here's a fly that is a little bit different. It has the mottled top and the light underside, but it has, instead of accurate representation of the legs, it has ginger hackle, stiff ginger hackle wrapped through the thorax. And this sticks out from the body because these flies, when these flies drift in the current, they extend their legs out to the sides, reaching for a rock to grab a hold of. They don't like to be drifting in the current. And when they get knocked loose from a rock, they reach out, and when they find a rock, they grab a hold of it and pull themselves over and get reorganized. When I'm fishing nymphs in this river, I like to fish 2 flies at the same time because it gives you a chance to try out a couple of things simultaneously. But I hate droppers. Droppers are always tangling up, and they give you nothing but headaches. My friend Jim Gilson in Pennsylvania showed me a real slick way of rigging up 2 flies so that you really reduce the number of hang-ups you have. I'll show you what I've got here. Just got my fluorescent butt leader tapering down to the end here. I've got my split shot about 10 inches above a stonefly nymph. And then instead of doing a dropper, all you do is put another piece of monofilament into the eye of that same fly. And about 10 inches below that, you tie your second fly on. So they're actually in a line rather than on a dropper. And they'll tangle once in a while, but nothing like the old dropper system with loops or having the one end of a blood knot left long. And I think that's just a great way to fish 2 flies. I guess you could probably fish 3 flies the same way if you wanted to. So let's see if we can make it work. This is what I would consider to be the middle section of the Crow's Nest River. It's above Lundbreck Falls, and it flows through some really pretty foothill country. There are no brown trout up here. There are some browns below the falls. Here it's just rainbows and whitefish. Sometimes it's a good idea, in fact I do it all the time, to, when you pick the fly up at the end of the cast, pick it up so that if the fish happens to have a hold of it, you'll hook them. Just pick it up like that, instead of picking it up real soft. And if there happens to be one there, you'll hook them. There we go, across the river. And back. What's he gonna do? Probably gonna get away. That's what they usually do. Whoa. I'm fishing these 2-weighted nymphs and 4 split shot on a 3-weight rod. A lot of people think you can't do that because it just won't handle it, but when you're casting short, the line weight I think is pretty irrelevant. And I actually think I can land nice fish like this a little easier on a light line rod because it absorbs the shock so well. This is a nice rainbow, 16, 17 inches. Took a little black Witch Creek stonefly. I should get the tape measure on that guy. No, I'm not going to do that. They're always smaller when you do that. Nice pink stripe. Just the kind of fish they catch in fishing videos. That's a perfect fish. There he goes. I like that. Guy could get used to this. There's a fish. Not a big fish, but it is a fish with fins and scales and all the requirements. Whoops. See, I gotta work on my, oh good. I'm standing through my line. I've got it wrapped around a bush. There's a fish there that's now wrapped around a stump. You don't usually see this stuff in fishing videos. There. Nothing like doing it with style. Away you go. Now, I'll be organized in about 20 minutes. There. Whoops, now I got the log. There. Nothing to this. You've got to be careful wading anytime, but especially when the river is high like it is now. There's probably a foot more water in the river now than there would be in midsummer. And I want to show you something about how to cross a stream like this. A lot of people get to the edge of the water and they want to go across the other side, so they start going straight across like this. And pretty soon the water's building up on their right-hand side like this, and they're starting to slide around and they're fighting the current, and it's really difficult to get across. The way to get across this is not to go perpendicular to the bank, but it's to angle yourself downstream. That'll work much better. You're moving with the current part of the time, and you don't feel nearly the force on your legs as you do when you're trying to go straight across. So you have to angle your way across. Go slowly. If you've got a bottom that's made up mostly of large rocks, try and step in the low spots rather than on top of the rocks. If you step on top of a rock, you can slide off of it, but if you step into the low spots, you're going to stay there. If it really gets to be difficult, you have to reach around with one foot, find a secure hold for it, then put your weight on that, then find another one with the other foot, and take it very slowly, one step at a time. The real key is to angle yourself downstream rather than trying to go straight across. If you want to pick up a stick or something on the bank to use as a wading staff, that's a big help. And watch what happens when I stop here, how much water builds up on my upstream side. It's about all I can do to stand right here, but as long as I'm moving slightly downstream, it's much easier. There's one thing you have to remember about this if you're going across a river, and that is be sure that you can get back across. For instance, if the water was real deep here and real deep up above me there, I might not be able to do it. You have to angle your way back across. I'm not going to go back the same way I came. That's all I mean, is to make sure that you have a safe route back, because you won't come back on the same line that you went across. I'm going to head up the river and try and find a fish. There's a fish. Oh, it feels like he may be kind of substantial. Ooh, gee, he ran right by my foot. Well, this fish really feels like he's got some shoulders. I'm going to have to go after him here. He's really, really strong. I suspect he's probably maybe the fish we were hoping we could catch here. He was laying right up at the head of that pool, probably because they're feeding actively and just glomming everything that came by. Just ran the little nymph through the top of the pool, and he was waiting there for it. I hope we can get a hold of this guy. He really would be worth getting a close look at. I'm going to move down with him here rather than try and pull him up through that heavy water. If you try and do that, it won't work with a big fish like this. Oh boy, he is a good one. Gee, I hope I can get this guy in. If he gets around the corner on me, we're going to have big problems, because the water's really, really fast down there. I'm going to have to stick with him and try and just wear him down. I should have a chance of landing a fish. I've had him on this long, and that's a good sign. I've got 3X tippet on there, which should hold just fine unless I do something stupid. Of course, there's always that chance. But I'm going to really try and be careful with this one and get a hold of him if I can. It's very easy to become impatient right at the end of the fight here and try and rush the fish the last few feet into your net. But boy, if the fish isn't ready, you shouldn't be ready either. Just try and be patient, and when he's tired, you can skid him over like there. That is a good fish. I don't know if I've ever caught one that big in this river. I guess maybe one other time I caught a fish about this size in the crow's nest. You kind of expect some fish that size in the bow, but we don't get many on this river this size. At least I don't. We expect to catch some 16 and 18 inchers. This fish looks like he'd probably go 22 or 23 inches. I'm not going to measure him because he's tired, but boy, I'll tell you, that is a pretty special fish. Won't make them any better than this one. This is the North Raven River in west central Alberta. It's one of our few true spring creeks. And this is a stream that has a real high population of brown trout and some really nice ones. As you can see, there's lots of cover, lots of undercut banks and some fallen trees and a lot of willow bushes along the banks. It's considered a very difficult stream to fish because, as with most spring creeks, it's very clear and it's very slow moving, very much flat water, as you can see. The fish will work the surface quite well. There's a lot of small insect hatches. And it is also set up in such a way that you can't really get across from a fish very often. It's very common that you have to fish almost straight upstream to the fish. If I was up here trying to fish down there, those fish would see us. So it's a very difficult stream. I really am fascinated with the place because there is so much going on under there, and yet it can be so hard to figure out at times. It's a kind of stream that'll drive you crazy, and a lot of people don't like it. But I think if you're from the east, you're used to fishing eastern spring creeks, or perhaps the best-known spring creeks in the west, in Montana and Idaho and Wyoming, you'd probably really enjoy the North Raven. This is very intense sort of fishing in the stream. You're concentrating all the time. You're moving slowly. You're watching always. It's not a sort of an easy, relaxing type of fishing, but I certainly enjoy it. It's technical fishing, I guess. You can't get beside the fish very often because of the high banks and the vegetation, so you're forced to fish straight up to a fish. And you usually either hook them or spook them in the first couple of casts. I'm sure we can probably do the latter here. Leader problems here. There he is. That's a decent brown trout. He's gone. I mentioned that I consider this to be a pretty demanding stream, and one of the things that helps is if you can control your casts pretty well. And I just want to show you a couple of the sort of specialty casts that I find useful on this stream, and really any place where you find rising fish in flat water. One of the real important things is to be able to cast and put slack in the leader so you can get a good drag-free drift to the fly. Lots of times, because of the different current speeds, if you cast a straight line, the fly is going to drag right away. Now, I wouldn't normally be fishing downstream like this, but I just want to show you these casts. A straight line, absolutely straight line cast is not too useful in very many situations. You want to be able to get some slack into the system. You often read about putting slack in by waving the rod tip sideways like this. That will put slack up here in the line, and it doesn't do you much good to have the slack in the line. You want slack in the leader, and more specifically, you want slack at the front end of the leader. And to get that, there's a couple of things you can do. One is to make a big high forward cast so that the fly drops down right on top of the leader, like this. And then you should get some slack right in the leader like that. And you get a much longer drift, really in any situation, when you can put that slack out in the leader rather than back here in the line. The other thing you can do is you make a normal tight loop forward cast, and just as the line is laying straight, you yank on it with your line hand, and it'll bounce back a little. That will put some slack in the leader too, like that. That is not as reliable, I don't think, as the other method, but if it's windy, it's a better way to go. And fishing a stream like this, where it's very difficult to get across from the trout, it's very helpful to be able to put the fly line down on the water beside the fish rather than right on the fish. And the reach cast that Doug Swisher and Carl Richards first talked about is very useful for doing that. And I think a lot of people don't realize how simple a cast this is. And it works on a principle that is very useful. And that principle is simply that once you've stopped your hand on the forward cast right there, and then at that point you've determined where the fly is going to land. And you can't really change that. But what you can still change is the configuration of the line on the water between you and the fly. And if you use that principle, you can make a reach cast very easily. You just make a cast, and while the line is landing, you move the rod somewhere else. You just don't lay the line down right here if you don't want to. So after you've stopped the rod, You've determined where the fly is going to go, and you can't change it. But you can just lay the line down somewhere else. The fly is going to go in the same place. And that will allow you to put the line down beside the fish rather than on top of the fish. It's very simple to do. It's been a really nice fish rise 4 times downstream of this bush up ahead of me here. And I'd really like to get this guy. This is a typical piece of North Raven water here. A nice slow corner, lots of brush. There we go, I got him. Oh! Going back under the brush. Don't do that. Might have to get out here and play goaltender. Ah, this is nice. I like this. Not a big fish, but he's a very worthwhile. Whoops, whoops. Browns love to go back to the cover. Just about a 12-incher or so. Not as big as I thought when I first saw him rise. But he was in a nice place. Brilliant orange spots on these fish. There we go. Good, that was fun. I'll find another one. This is the Bow River downstream of the city of Calgary. The Bow has gained its reputation primarily for 2 reasons: for the large average size of fish that it produces, and for the fact that this fishing occurs within a few miles of a city of 500,000 people. What we need to think of the Bow is as a big fish place. In the time I've spent on the river, it has never failed to be a river that produces an exceptional average size of fish. We're getting more very large fish now than we used to be. Back when I was guiding in the late 70s and early 80s, it was very unusual to catch a fish 24 inches or better. These days, we've got a lot of very competent guides working the river who really know what's going on, and there are 24-inch plus fish caught every week. So the biggest skill a fisherman needs to do well on the Bow now is to be versatile. Someone who comes and is going to bring a 4-weight rod and a size 16 pale morning dun, and that's all they're prepared to use, most of the time is going to go home disappointed. But someone who comes and is prepared to spend time looking for rising fish, hunting them down and fishing to them when you find them, and fishing streamers and nymphs as the situation demands, is almost always going to go away happy. One of the trouble people have with any big river, and including the Bow, is trying to figure out where the heck you're going to fish in it. If you look out here, the river is higher than normal, which makes it even, I think, harder to figure out where the fish are. I don't know how far it is across there, 100 yards probably, and it's moving along real fast. And a lot of people, particularly if they've fished smaller streams or eastern streams all their life, get to the Bow and they say, okay, where are the fish? And they really don't know what to do. And you have to understand a lot of things about big rivers before you can find the fish. First of all, most of the water in big rivers is not going to have any fish in it, even a productive river like this one. So you have to try and break it down and figure out where they're going to be. And an easy way to do that is to look at little side channels like we've got over here. This side channel is way bigger than it normally is, but you can read a side channel much the way you would read a small stream. Short line nymphing method is really good in streams where you can identify the holding places of the fish easily and get up pretty close to them. I just put my indicator on here, and I've used a little fold-on foam type, and it sticks to itself, and you can put it on there and it'll work real good. You like to put this about 1.5 times the depth of the water you're fishing in, and I think I'm probably fishing in water not really any deeper than what I'm standing in. So I've got you can see I've got the indicator about that far from the flies. And there's a little soft spot, slow section water right here, but where these 2 currents come together. And if I can reach across that with my rod,
then the nymph should run down through that quite nicely. If you don't keep a high rod, here's what will happen. This line here gets belly downstream, and the nymph is racing through that pocket way faster than it should be. So with a short line nymphing, I think most anybody who does it a lot, I think will tell you have to keep the rod real high, like this, keep as little line on the water as possible. The whole secret to nymph fishing is to make it as easy as possible for the fish to take your fly. You can catch a lot of fish on nymphs when the fish are actually looking for them, because then they'll move some distance to take them. But if the fish are not really in a feeding mood, you have to put it right in front of them. It's just like if you've just been at a big dinner party. If somebody passes you a plate of goodies, you'll probably take one, but you wouldn't get up and wander around and look for the fridge to find your own. So unless the fish are really looking for the nymphs, you're going to have to get the fly right to the fish so it's as easy for him to take it as it is for him to leave it. The water here is high, much higher than it normally is at this time of year, so we're forced to fish in a little different kind of stuff. You could normally fish right in a lot of these funnels in the side channels. And here we're sort of fishing the soft water alongside them. There was no great wonderful theory that helped us figure out that the fish would be in those kind of places. We just tried a lot of things and caught some fish there. I think that's how a lot of theories get to exist. Somebody stumbles onto something and then tries to figure out a way to explain it. I also do something when I'm nymphing. When the fly gets to the end of a drift like that, and instead of picking it up gently and making a cast, I pick it up with a little bit of a strike too, just in case there happens to be a fish picking the fly up just as I'm about to recast. You get the odd one that way that you're probably not entitled to, but I just figure that balances out with all the times when you do everything right and don't get anything. What do we got there? We got a fish. Boy, that fish was slow to start to move. Oh, he's gone. The thing they call a tuck cast. And I think it was George Harvey who first figured this out. All it is you cast a little bit above the water quite hard so the fly will bounce back and down, and the fly will hit the water first, and we get a little bit of a head start on the leader. Now there's a fish on the leader and everything. Now, how many times did I fish up there? It's a nice rainbow before he took that. And the tuck cast may have got it deep enough. Oh, nice rainbow. I'm going to try and keep him from going off the end of the island here. I think we're biased up here, but we really think our rainbow trout are spectacular in the bow. All the jumping and carrying on they do. These fish have probably spawned within the last 3 weeks. So they're not at their peak. Shallower water here. I should have been counting the jumps on this fish. There we go. Took the little red San Juan worm. That's just the typical release of the Bow River rainbow. Good. This is a little worm that lives in the rocks and silt of the rivers, and it looks a lot like an earthworm. This one's a little beat up looking, but it's not a critter that lives in the ground. It lives in the water, and it belongs there. I don't remember the name of these things, but if you check Gary Borger's book called Naturals, he talks about them. It's an aquatic worm, and there's lots of different patterns to imitate it. This one is a little pattern tied with what they call ultra chenille. Probably going to ask me why it's so bright red, and I can tell you that I'm not really sure, but I suspect that this fly is not nearly as red as that once it gets down a couple feet under the water. But it has the right shape and generally the right color, and if you put it in the same places as the natural, the fish seem to take it. A lot of people wonder about this fly and whether using these things as fly fishing or not, and I have my own opinion on it, and basically I think that it doesn't matter what you fish with so much as it matters what you do with the fish when you catch them. I don't think that fish would have cared if that was a San Juan worm or a size 24 Quill Gordon. He got stuck, and he got caught, and he got let go. And I think he'd probably rather be caught and let go on that than caught and bashed on the head on a spinner or a fly or anything else. So I think that there's nothing morally more ethical about fly fishing than any other kind of fishing. It's what you do with the fish that's important. So it doesn't bother me to fish with these things. If it bothers you, you don't have to use them. We've shown you some of the Bow River when it's at less than its best in late June, when the water is kind of high and off color and you have to fish basically nothing but streamers and nymphs. But we've come back in August when the river's a little lower and conditions are much better for the dry fly fishing that's made the river famous. And I think we're going to spend a little time trying to walk the banks a bit and see if we can't find some snouts to throw little dry flies at. So we'll give that a go. To find rising fish on the Bow is not a matter of simply turning up on the river and finding fish rising right out in front of where you arrive at the water. You have to look for them. We've been floating the river this morning, and we're stopping and looking up along the banks to try and find a fish that's feeding on top. And we just found one, and he's straight upstream of me here in very shallow water and very slow water, and it's a real typical sort of place to find a fish. And the interesting thing about it is if you're floating by way out there in the main river, look, even if you're looking over against the bank, chances are you wouldn't see the fish. You have to pull in and get out and hunt for them. There's not a lot of flies in the water, and he's not coming up really frequently, but I think he's up often enough to fish for. And once we can establish right where he is, we'll try and get into position and see if we can get him to eat something. The rising fish in the Bow are always in the slower water off to the edge of the river, in places that are usually you wouldn't expect a fish to live. And in fact, they probably don't live there. They just move in to feed when there are bugs around. I'll see if I can get this guy to eat. There's not an awful lot of any one fly in the water. There's a few little caddis flies and there's a few little spinners. There he is. Boy, it's a nice fish. He may be inclined to eat several different flies. I'm going to put a little caddis over him first. If I get the right angle on the fish here, I hope I can put the fly over the fish without putting line or leader over him. I don't want to get very much closer. Make a cast intentionally out to the right here just to make sure everything is behaving okay. Make sure I'm going to be able to get a decent float. I should almost be able to see this fish in the water, but I can't. There he is. He's in tight to the bank. You never want to yank the fly up out of the water because you've made a bad cast, if it's anywhere near where the fish can see it. It's behind him. There he is. He's moved up a bit. Getting it into him. That might do it. There we go. Oh, I love getting them out of shallows like that. They don't know what to do. It takes them a while to figure out where they're going to go. This is the best part of this river, as far as I'm concerned, is when you can find a big guy doing that in the shallow water. I think it's a rainbow. Even like he still doesn't know he's hooked or anything. Head for the big river. People sometimes make the mistake of trying to play a fish from one spot, and the fish gets farther and farther away and faster in the water, and there's more and more line drag, and they lose it. You want to follow a fish if you can, because on light tippet, you're just not going to pull them back upstream. Sometimes if you can get below a fish, it's great, but you can't always do that. I like to keep them up in the slower water if I can. Yeah, it's a rainbow. Good. That's a very nice fish to catch on a little dry fly. Well, he's probably, I guess probably 18 inches. There's nothing I'd rather do than find a big fish in shallow water like that. This is exactly the spot where that fish was laying and feeding on the surface. A lot of times I think people don't believe me when I tell them that you can catch big fish in real shallow water. You can see that he was right. Actually, the fish took my fly, I think, right about here. Yes, I guess it's about 14 inches deep or something like that, and very slow. And that's the kind of place that they'll be, and where you have a little deflection like we got up above here, and anything to funnel a little bit of food together and collect it. That's the kind of place to look for rising fish rather than way out there in the middle of the river. They just won't sit out in the middle of that and try and eat stuff on top. It just costs them too much energy to do that. Could be a chance for a little nice fish on a little fly. There it is. Coming right out. There he goes, there he goes. If you're going to get the dry fly fishing on the bow, it's often a very good idea to be aware of two situations in which you're likely to have best fishing. One is very late in the evening, and we're far enough north that in July it doesn't get dark until 10 at night or after that. And lots of times the best dry fly fishing will be between 10 or 11, and people are not used to that. They fish till 7 or 8 o'clock and they go home, and then they hear about the great dry fly fishing and they think it's all stories. Seen a second fish come up along this bank. It's a little farther along. He won't eat an atom. It's one of my all-time favorite dry flies. One on the first cast. He will in the second. Uh-oh. The other thing that will promote good dry fly fishing is cloudy, overcast weather. The fish in the bow are very much sensitive to sun. They won't rise as well on a sunny day as a cloudy day. And probably the best time to find rising fish on the bow would be in late summer, September. If you've got an overcast, drizzly, gray, cold day, we'll get the little Baetis flies thick on the water and there'll be rising fish. I'm going to try and fish some grasshoppers today. It's a nice warm August afternoon, and you can hear them making noise on the bank here behind us, and there's lots of tall grass around. So we're going to try and see if we can't get a fish to come up to a grasshopper pattern. It's one of the easier ways to fish the bow, although it's not always productive. When it is, it's really a lot of fun, and you can do it quite simply. You can fish them from a drifting boat, casting them in towards the banks, or you can wade and fish. I think we'll probably wade and fish this afternoon a little bit with them, see if they can work. This one has a blue leg. I never noticed that before. The things you need to be able to fish hoppers, of course, it has to be the right time of year. You need water with not necessarily a lot of depth, but maybe 18 inches or a couple of feet of depth, and reasonable current flow right along the bank where the grasshoppers live. You need basically the hoppers to fall into water that the trout live in, and that means there has to be enough depth and cover right along the bank for the fish to be there. And you can fish it from a drifting boat or cast it against the bank and work your way up. It doesn't require the finesse that fishing the tiny little mayflies and caddisflies does. You can use probably a 5 or 6 weight rod and 3X tippet and a size 10 fly. You can see my hopper I've got here is actually smaller than the real one, and this is not a particularly big natural hopper that I've got. And you fire it up there along the banks and wait for somebody to come out and eat it. One of the nice things about the hopper fishing in the bow is that you really don't sacrifice the size of the fish. In a lot of other streams, if you're going to fish attract or dry flies, royal wolves or grasshoppers or things like that, you sort of make a concession that you're going to catch a smaller class of fish. And in the bow, that really doesn't have to be true. You can, while you may not catch the absolute biggest fish, the 7 or 8 or 9 pounder in the bow, you'll catch lots of 2 and 3 and 4 pounders on hoppers in the bow when it's working right. You have to persist with it. A lot of people fish a hopper for half an hour and it doesn't work, so they give up, and somebody else will stay with it, and at some point during the day, the hopper fishing gets good and they end up doing very well with it. So you need to persist.
So fishing with hoppers in general is a pretty simple way to go. Every time I'm along one of these high banks, I give my right arm to be ambidextrous. Dave McLennan is a Pennsylvania Spring Creek fisherman who taught me an important lesson about hopper fishing that has to do with how you deliver the fly to the water. If the water you're fishing in flows right by the places where the grasshoppers live, it's probably not a bad idea to let your fly land with a little bit of a splat, because the fish in a place like this will be used to seeing hoppers falling on top of them, and the little splat of the fly will probably just announce the arrival of dinner. On the other hand, if you're fishing in a place where the fish won't see the hoppers fall in, but will just be used to having them drift into view, you should deliver the fly more gently so that your fly drifts into view just like the naturals they're used to. So I think if you give some thought to how you let the thing hit the water, it'll probably help you with your hopper fishing.
Sometimes when you fish attractive dry flies, you kind of sacrifice the size of the fish. There's one. He surprised me. Ooh. Here he goes. Heading on down. That's about a 15 or 16 inch rainbow. I've got 3X here so I can lean on the fish a little. Any place I can go to it's easy to land this fish, so I'm just going to have to do it right here. That fish took fairly quickly. A lot of times with the hoppers, it's sort of funny. All the books and things say that they explode on them, but on the bow, a lot of times the big fish will just sip a hopper, just as if it was a little spinner. This fish isn't really a big fish, so maybe that's why I didn't get it. Let's head out here. Good. Not a bad fish. There you go. There's a fish coming up occasionally ahead of me here. He's not up real often, but we've seen him about 10 times, I guess, while we've been fooling around trying to get into position. There's not an awful lot of flies on the water, but there are a lot of caddisflies in these bushes along the edge of the river, and I suspect there's a few of them coming down to the water, maybe falling off, getting blown off. There he is, right in front of me. So I'm going to try a little caddis. See if I can show that to him. I thought about trying to get out here and get an angle on this fish, but I think I will be in water a little quicker than the fish is in, and I probably won't get a good float. And this water is a little bit broken on top, and if you just show the fish tippet, you can sometimes fish straight up to them. You want to be sure you don't overshoot them. But if you just put it about a foot or 2 feet straight upstream of the fish, sometimes you can get them that way. He's not rising very often and he's moving, so it's a little bit tricky to get a reading on him. I'm going to intentionally fish a little short until I know exactly where he is. When the fish are in shallow water like this, you can get close to them because they have a relatively small window they can see out of. So as long as you're careful and stay behind them, you can get close. I'd feel a lot better if I could see him rise again. The cloud cover we've got today is a real benefit. There's very few flies on the water, and if it was bright, I don't think the fish would be up at all. But they're much more willing to come to the top on a cloudy day on the bow. And certain fish just like to feed on top. When you find one of those, they're more willing to do it anytime. I think I'm going to just wait until I see him again. You've got to treat each one of these fish when you find a single like this. Each one has got to be a project. You've got to kind of try and do everything right. Check your hook, make sure it's sharp and all that, and think about where you're going to fish from rather than just bulling your way in and starting to cast. The fish probably won't go away unless I make them go away, so you can take your time. You don't have to be in a big hurry about it. I'm so paranoid about spooking them that I never actually get around to throwing the fly in where it belongs, and you throw it short of them and to one side of them, and it's almost like it's a psychological game. You've got to just force yourself to actually throw the darn fly at the fish. He moved up. Oh, he came up twice in a row. Just sort of drape this leader over his shoulder. That might do it. Come on. That was right where I wanted it. But I guess it wasn't right where he wanted it. He's in the same place. That might get him. Just enough breeze to make it a little hard to turn over the leader. Oh, there he is, way up ahead. Fish is moving around. That might get him. Oh, he came up and tried it. It's a big rainbow. I could see the pink in his gill covers when he came up for that. I didn't stick him. We'll see if he'll come back. Sometimes they will. That makes you shake. Might have to try a darker caddis. This one's fairly light so I can see it, but the real ones aren't really very light. Yeah, I'll put a darker one on. This would also be a fish you might catch on a little nymph. There it is. Oh, what a fish. Japers. I think I'm going for a walk. Oh. I'm gonna try and get below the fish a little. All the books and videos you read tell you to get below the fish, right? There he goes. So much for that theory. I'll get him up here where I can hit him, but I don't think he's anywhere near done yet. Get his head up, maybe. No, not yet. Yeah, maybe. His head up. Put a light elk hair caddis over this fish, and then I put a little CDC caddis over him. You want it, and then I switched to a darker one. Right there. And the first cast, he ate it. That's a neat fish. Look at the big, fat, and thick. I must have jumped about 7 times. That's fun. And there's not many places where you can sneak up on a fish in a foot of water. He was in water just like this, about a foot deep. Feeding on the surface. Wow, what a perfect critter that is. You should go and make some babies. Oh boy. things I like about fly fishing is the fact that we can enjoy it with all our senses. We're standing here looking at the mountains and the foothills and the Crow's Nest River, listening to birds, the river in the background, and I can smell a wolf willow over here on the hill that always makes me think of spring in Alberta. There's a lot more to this business than the fish. Sometimes people, I think, take the whole game way too seriously, and they feel like they're not supposed to have fun unless they're catching fish, and you shouldn't take the sport up unless you're prepared to become a very, very proficient technically at it. You got to understand Latin and learn about all the entomology and that. And you don't have to do that. If you want to, that's fine. But the guy that has fun fishing is a good fisherman, and that's the objective, I think. And I really hope that more people maybe realize that. I think the books and the magazine articles and some of the videos and things and just make it out as if it's something really important. It's not important. If the worst problem you've got today is that you can't catch a fish over there, things aren't too bad. There. Nothing to this.